And we will have, come next, Corinne will come first and talk about principle number 3 and its applications in biographies and storytelling. And then we'll have Angie McIntyre, who will talk about memorization and principle number 4, and Nancy Willis, who will talk about the 4 R's, word studies, and notebooks. And the good news is they can break into your lunch. I hope that's okay, a little bit. Okay, so we will have, right now, Corinne will come up.
Okay, just stay right where you are. Actually, I want everybody to stand up. Okay, I'm going to picture all of you as 4th graders because I teach 4th grade and adults are scary. So right now you're all 4th graders, and when I ask for a volunteer, my entire class raises their hand. So I need 2 volunteers. I need 1 man and 1 woman. So all of your hands should go up. Okay, and I always call on the quiet students, so if you really want to be called on, you're not going to say anything. Okay, I'll have you come up. Thank you. Come on up. And I need 1 man. Thank you. Excellent. Come on up. Okay, today I'm going to quickly, because I know you're all hungry and your stomachs are growling, and mine is too, while these 2 individuals are dressing up as Paul Revere and Mrs. Revere, I should just say Mr. Revere and Mrs. Revere, I'm going to teach you a way to remember the 7 principles. You get the white apron, he gets the leather. Okay, I can't hold the mic. Hello. Mrs. Revere, I will have you stand on this side of Mr. Revere. Mr. Revere, I'll have you here. Okay, I want to show you this book I'm using, and I'm going to have someone be my timer. Will someone time me? I don't want to go over time. So I'm going to take 9 minutes. Who can time me? Thank you. Okay, so this book I'm using is called America's Paul Revere. It's written by Esther Forbes, who also wrote Johnny Tremaine, which we study in 4th grade. And it's illustrated by Lind Ward. So in my handout, I showed you some different ways to remember stories, because for me, I can't remember the details. And that is one of the scary things about telling a story, is forgetting the really important part, and then everybody goes, huh? Like telling a joke. I'll go to tell a joke and I'll forget the most important part, and everybody kind of goes, that wasn't very funny. You know, so there's a few little ways to help you. I have my cheat sheet right here. It's called a keyword outline. So I'm going to use this to tell you about Mr. Revere and Mrs. Revere. All day, Mr. Revere worked in his silver shop on Clark's Wharf in Boston. He built beautiful things: tankards, sauce boats, silver cups, silver buckles for gentlemen's shoes, and rings for ladies' fingers. Mrs. Revere, would you act this out as I tell the story? Thank you. I forgot to mention that one detail. Great job. The students will do this. They'll do it very well. Thank you. They do. Mrs. Revere worked all day caring for her little home. She would go to market. She would wash her clothing. She would make clothing. She would tend her children. From sun up until sundown, they worked. Beautiful. But not on the Sabbath. They kept the Sabbath day holy. And at night, they had time to themselves. And they would tell stories. They would tell stories about their Mr. Revere would tell stories about his boyhood and how he came from France. He lived in a beautiful part of France where vineyards grew. And there was a king in France who did not like their religion. They were Huguenots. And he thought that all Huguenots should leave France. Well, Mr. Revere's parents did not want to leave France, but they didn't want him to grow up in such a troubled country. So when he was 13 years old, they sent him away from France to a place where he could have freedom. Well, Mr. Revere was 13 and frightened. He knew he would never see his parents again. So he went to an uncle on an island of Guernsey and talked to this uncle and tried to figure out what he was going to do as a 13-year-old. And they decided to go to America. And he was apprenticed to a beautiful silver maker. So he learned how to make silver. He would teach his son, Paul Revere, this story of how revoir means oak, and how he should be like the oak, strong and mighty, not so beautiful and showy, but strong and mighty. So his oldest son, Paul Revere, learned from him at story time. Mrs. Revere would tell stories to their children about her home, about not Peter Pan, Robin Hood. I gotta see my notes. And they would enjoy these stories together as a family. Well, we all know what happened to Paul Revere. We know that revoir was changed to revere because no one could pronounce it. And in fact, they made fun of him and his French accent. So young Paul Revere learned from his father the trade of silversmithing. And he learned to be mighty and strong like the oak. And he became the Paul Revere that we know. This man, his father, Mr. Revere, died when Paul Revere was only 18 years old. So he cared for his dear mother, Mrs. Revere, and lived with her, or she lived with him, his entire life. What Christian qualities, thank you very much, you did a great job. What Christian qualities do you see, or did you hear in the story of Mr. Revoir/Revere? What did you hear that you could relate to what Janet taught us about freedom, about Christ-like characteristics that we want to emulate? What did he show or she show? What did you hear in the story? Yes. Courage to leave. 13 years old, leave his father and mother, never see them again. Am I okay on time? Okay. What other? Any others? What did you hear? Yes.
Well,
Trust.
In the feelings that they had and in a higher faith to be able to go through what he felt he needed to do.
Good, excellent. Faith, trust, the ability to trust in God and not just in our own little minds. Good. Yes. Yes. All day, sun up to sundown, they worked. Industry. Yes, thank you.
They had the commandments, which meant that they would be able to hear the voice of the Lord telling them what to do. So when Paul Revere takes his place in ministry, it's no small thing. He's got God behind him because he's already been Christian.
Beautiful. He learned to trust God, to keep the law, to obey the law, keep the commandments. Excellent. Excellent. And taught his son that as well, the Paul Revere we know. Yes, Julie. Beautiful. And how did he teach his children? Did anyone notice? How did he teach his children? Stories. Do you see why stories are so important? When I went to school, I was taught history with numbers, with dates and names and meaningless information that I couldn't hook to anything. So my knowledge of history was very limited when I had to come here to American Heritage and teach history. I kind of went, I don't remember any of those dates. And it was kind of frightening. And so stories are how we learn and remember historical events, which is how Mr. Revere taught his children and his family through stories. And that is how, at American Heritage, and how his parents and teachers, and Jesus Christ did himself, taught through parables. We know this. We know that President Uchtdorf teaches through stories, and we remember the story of Great Aunt Rose, and we remember the principles that they teach us through stories. And I would submit to you all that you should be a storyteller. And I'm not a storyteller. I'm sort of an actress because I have experience on stage, but you don't have to be an actress. All you need to be is yourself. Find your voice as a storyteller. Figure out the story, know it well enough that you can tell it without having to read the thing, right? So that you can have some actors come up and portray the story, and the students love that. And I have everyone raise their hand when I act out stories. They all want to be involved. And that's how we're going to remember the stories and the principles of Christ-like character and all of the principles. Let's try, do I still have a minute? Okay. Well, everyone stand up one more time. We're going to go through them again.
Will come up together.
Is the PowerPoint on here? Okay, perfect. All right, I'm not really glad to be here. I'm going to be honest. I will be glad in about 7 minutes for my part. Then I'll be really glad I was here. I must be a slow learner because as I heard these principles, they were a little bit up here, and I've been here for 7 years. And finally, as Jenna is talking, and as I'm looking at these things, and I'm hearing the methods teach the principles, and we need to point that out to our students. That as they're seeing these principles, they're seeing them in the methods that we're using to teach. And that is the beauty of this whole process. That's so amazing. So the tips and tools for teaching are the methods that we use to teach these very things. So how can I teach my students to understand Principle 4? Well, we use the method of memorization. Consonance is the most precious, the most sacred of all property. And when you think about a memorization, we're going to do a little activity really quick. First of all, I want you to turn to your neighbor and I want you to share something that you've memorized. Now, don't freak out. I did this with my daughter and my husband and my mom and my dad, and they all freaked out. And so I said to my daughter, "What have you memorized?" And she's like, "I didn't memorize anything." I'm like, "Yes, you did. Think of one thing that you've memorized. It can be anything." So I said to my mom, she does not like to be put on the spot. So if you're like my mom, relax, it's okay. So I said to my mom, "What's one thing that you've memorized?" And she's like, "I don't know any scriptures, I don't know any quotes, I don't know anything." I was like, "Mom, yes you do. Think about one thing that's important to you that you've memorized. A pearl of wisdom from your parents, a saying that a friend has said that you've put in your memory. Anything like that." And she says, "The Lord helps he who helps himself." I said, "Exactly. That's a memorization." Okay, so I want you to, using my mom, not being freaked out by anything, turn to your neighbor and tell them one thing that you've memorized. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to share on both sides, so say it fast. You've got 10 seconds left. All right, everybody back up here with me in 3, 2, 1. You're not quite as good as third graders. They could be quiet right now. Okay, eyes right here back on me. Perfect. So now I want you to think, why did you memorize what you memorized? Why was it important to you? Why did you memorize that thing? I want you to turn to your neighbor and tell them why you memorized it. Go. Okay, everybody right back up here with me. Fantastic. Let's hear just a couple of things. So just raise your hand. Let's shout out some things of why you memorized what you did. Go ahead. An assignment, okay? Important to your dad. I love that one. Know exactly what you're talking about.
I memorized my husband's phone number because one time I was away 12 hours away from home, lost all my contacts, and didn't have his number.
Okay, it was important. Okay, now here's the next thing. How has what you've memorized helped you? I want you to turn to your neighbor and I want you to share that. All right, come right back here with me and let's hear some of those things. How has what you've memorized helped you? So, raising your hand, go. Great, those words had power. Other reasons? Okay, to give confidence, great. It's there when you need it. Okay, now let's go back and think about the principle of conscience being our most sacred property. And let's look at this quote. Great power can come from memorizing scriptures, but a truth can be applied universally. So if memorizing scriptures is good, then memorizing good words is also a good thing, or a quote. To memorize a scripture is to forge a new friendship. It is like discovering a new individual who can help in time of need, give inspiration and comfort, and be a source of motivation for needed change. Do you see how powerful that can be when you're guarding your conscience? And we did it with a memorization. And the students love them. You would think that they wouldn't, because nowadays they're taught that things are at their fingertips and why memorize something when they can find it on Google. But to have it in your mind, think about POWs. What did they have with them? They had what was in their mind. They had those words to play over and over again to bring them comfort, to give them strength, and also to teach them at a deeper level than they had been taught before. That's power. Isn't that a great tool for teaching that very principle? I thought that was awesome. I don't have to really memorize it because it's applied all the time when I'm teaching them memorizations and when I'm memorizing myself. I thought that was so great. Okay, so now for 1 minute, actually we're going to shorten that to 30 seconds. You're going to write down something that you're going to take away from this, something you learned from this exercise that you just barely did. One more time. Absolutely. Okay, you've got 3 seconds left. Sounded right, yeah? Okay, we're moving on. Oh, forward. Okay, so now how can I help my students remember this one? And words that really stuck out to me as I was looking through this principle: protection and flourishing, internal restraints, tempering, protecting individual accountability, and rights and responsibilities. Those really stuck out to me as words that I needed to remember. So how am I going to teach those to my students? By 4Ring. Okay, so what is 4Ring? First of all, it's researching a subject, a word, or studying. Then reasoning by identifying leading ideas and basic principles, and all of these go back to the 7 principles. You're going to tie everything back to one of those principles. Relating it to other areas of study or to the world around me so that it becomes mine, and then recording it, writing down what I've learned. So let's see how we use the 4Ring method in the exercise that we just did. So what did we do to research? What was the research that we used for that whole thing? Thinking and our memorizations. Finding the quote, memorizing it, absolutely. What was the reasoning? What did you do to reason? Why we memorized it? Yeah, what does it mean to me? How did we relate it? How did it affect me? And your record, you just wrote down. You did the 4Ring process. And it was so powerful, it helped you learn. That's the beauty of 4Ring, is it's that interactive learning process, the method of learning, rather than just being spoken at and regurgitating what. It becomes a part, it lives to you, the learning experience. So now think about these words, and you see even 4Ring in those words? You see the process of 4Ring as you look at the words that are highlighted? And that whole process takes you right through the powerful principle that Janet taught us about. What a beautiful method we have to use through memorizations and 4Ring. So I am finished. Thank you for letting me present, and now my better half.
The other half. All right. We have a variety of methods that are near and dear to our hearts here at the school. Word studies is just one of them. Raise your hand if you've used word studies in your teaching, in classrooms, at home. Good, so you're familiar. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with the specifics. But in pondering about this and relating it to the principles, I thought of 2 purposes of doing word studies. And one is to humbly learn from others. As we teach our children and ourselves to look at the words of other people, it immediately causes us or requires us to be humble, that we don't know everything. And as we explore the thoughts and words of other people on a topic, it enlarges our own understanding, and it allows us to develop a personal understanding that's meaningful to us and makes sense. Let me back up a minute here. When we really listen to others' thoughts and consider their thoughts, this process will shape and strengthen our own thoughts. And when we understand words better through doing word studies, we govern our conversation and have greater restraint, respect, as well as influence in our discourse with others, which you can see relates strongly to those first 4 principles, that we have that self-government and we have the ability to articulate when we really understand what a word means. To apply those thoughts, it's really important that we understand our students or the children that we're working with and what their abilities are in creating a word study. Depending on the understanding and abilities of the children, we need to modify how we do word studies. My experience has been teaching kindergarten through 5th grade, and we can't tell kindergarten through 5th graders to just say, do a word study. This is what you do. Find this, this, and this, and go figure it out. They aren't capable of doing that. And so what I have done with some of my word studies is I give them the dictionary, the 1828 dictionary definition, and then we talk about it together as a class. We talk together and do some reasoning, because some of them are just not able to pull those thoughts out of their minds until they've heard their peers. And then they have their own paper on which to record. And I do the same with the words of prophets and other wise men and women. I give them 1 or 2 quotes. We go through them together and reason together. And then they write down, what is the reasoning or the principle that you got from this discussion we had? And then we do the same with the scriptures. And then they're more able and ready to write their own personal definition. there's also a possibility that you don't even have them do the writing. You could do the whole thing orally and chart it on the board as a class. The writing and how the writing is done really needs to be at the level of ability and interest and capability of the children. Otherwise, it's just going to be them parroting what they think you want them to say. And that's here, but it's not here. And so if we really want word studies to get to the heart, we need to look at what their abilities are. I want to spend a little more time on word studies because, not word studies, sorry, I am really flabbergasted and flustered by that clock that's telling me you're hungry and you don't want to be here. So would you just turn and tell your neighbor some way you have used word studies that has been very powerful? Just take a minute. How have you had a successful experience with word studies? Great, I'm seeing good conversation. And I'm going to ask you to wrap it up now. And at lunch, find somebody else to talk to because we're going to move on to the notebook method. I love that fifth principle and the fourth principle. All of the principles are good, but the concept that we have stewardship over our souls, our labor, and our possessions is a powerful principle that can be taught through the notebook method. A few years ago, I was asked to teach a workshop similar to this on the notebook method, and we talked a lot about record keeping and how we are a record keeping people. That is just part of our heritage. It's almost genetic for Latter-day Saints to be record keepers. But since that time, I have learned some insights that have been very helpful to me. For those of you who are not teachers here, so can't raise your hand if you're a teacher here, how many of you have used the notebook in some way in your teachings at home? Okay, so you have some experience with that. Most of us use notebooks to store materials, but I want you to walk away today with at least 2 ideas of different ways to use notebooks in addition to that. We know that they're for keeping records in and a place to store information. But another great tool that the notebook can be for us is to promote individual accountability. Periodically throughout the year, we need to check in and ask ourselves, am I being true to the standards that we established at the beginning of the year? Teachers here all have classroom constitutions that talk in some degree about the quality of the notebook or the quality of work. And if we never stop and self-assess or allow children to self-assess, we're missing an opportunity to use that notebook to teach them. Another way that it helps promote individual accountability is I've used the student notebooks a lot for quizzes. I tell the students, I teach science, and I don't expect them to memorize everything because that is not realistic in this day and age when there is so much information. We need to teach them how to find information, and there are some basic things they need to memorize, but I want them to learn how to access information, including their own. And so when we have quizzes, I tell them, you are welcome to use anything in your notebook, any notes that you've taken, worksheets that you have finished, and this immediately becomes an accountability issue because if they haven't been taking notes very well, if they haven't completed their work, there's a very natural consequence. If they have been doing great note-taking, tidy work, and it's organized, there's a great immediate consequence. So it's an opportunity to teach some individual accountability. We could also use our notebooks as learning tools. When we use our notebooks just for ourselves, like the quizzes example, that's a great learning tool. But another one is to use them to teach their peers. If I have a notebook of information that is personal to me and things that I have learned, I can use that information to teach someone else. And I challenge you as teachers, whether in a classroom or at home, to find opportunities to do that. For example, I have my 4th graders do some research on ocean animals. And then they teach first grade what they learned using the notes that they've taken. And it's just a very powerful tool when you have an authentic audience that you're creating a record for to share with. It changes how they take notes, but it also gives them an opportunity to share what they've learned in a very meaningful way. So a notebook can be an opportunity to learn. And if you have any children who had me as a teacher this year, I challenged every one of them to go home and teach at least one family home evening lesson out of their notebook this summer. So please take them up on that. Make them do that. Another powerful tool, a powerful way we can use notebooks as a tool is a self-assessment tool. As children use the content in their notebooks, I love this at the end of the year, to go through and just spend 10, 15 minutes and say, let's go through our notebooks. Let's see what you've learned this year. What do you notice? Has your handwriting changed? Hopefully it has, for the good and not for the bad or for the worse. But it gives them an opportunity to reflect. If we just store things and never go back and look at them, we have missed a great opportunity to self-assess and see what we have learned. Now, students aren't the only ones who use notebooks. As teachers, I'm going to invite you to think differently about how you use notebooks as well. Do we model using a notebook? We go to these workshops and services and gather all kinds of wonderful handouts and information. You don't have to raise your hand on this, I will. How many of you take those notebook pages and you put them somewhere and then within 6 months you have no idea where they are and you can't pull them back out readily to use them? Then they've lost their meaning. So as teachers, it's really helpful for us to create a notebook system that's valuable to us, that makes sense to us, where we can gather that information that has been enlightening and inspiring to us and put them in a place where we can find it and use it. We do that with materials related to teaching. We also do that with things related outside of teaching. Do you have a personal study journal when you study the scriptures? Do you, in fact, I'm going to not talk so much for a minute. I'm going to give you 1 minute to turn and tell the person next to you a way that you have used either a teaching journal or a personal journal that has benefited you. Instead of listening to my ideas, share with each other either a teaching notebook of some kind or a personal journal notebook that has been helpful to you. Go ahead and take a minute and talk about that. Wonderful, I see great ideas. I would love to have 3 ideas shared with the whole group. So as you wrap it up now, if you have one that's just burning that someone shared with you that's an awesome idea that you want to use now, raise your hand. Let's see if we could get a couple of ideas of ways you have been using notebooks that we could share. Yes? Excellent, a personal journal, your own timeline. Excellent example. Anybody else want to share? Yes?
I have a scripture journal. I don't use it regularly, but when I do, I do like a trail. So if there's a certain phrase in the scripture that I really like, I write it down, and I write down the scripture, and I write down, okay, I don't go back. Write another scripture, put my thoughts and feelings in any quotes that I find from conference. And I know I don't go back, but if I do, it's like, wow, that's interesting.
Right, and so that might be something you want to do sometime, is to go back and review. But that's great to have a place to link all those great ideas. One more. Yes?
My friend had a great idea. She wrote, when she was in high school, she wrote letters to her
an interesting idea? So as youth, write to your future children and then give the letters to them when they're the same age. Powerful idea. Notebooks are there to be a tool to strengthen our learning, to strengthen our connection with these principles, the timeline principle of individuality, our conscience, all of those things can be wrapped up in the notebook method. Now, the last challenge I have for you is to just turn and tell, 30 seconds, something different you're going to do with notebooks next fall that you haven't tried before. And I hate to interrupt wonderful conversations, but know that this can carry over into lunch. And the last challenge I have for you is to use either a personal notebook or your teaching notebook in front of your classes at times to pull from them and say, oh, I found this thought, and I wrote it down in my journal. I wrote it in my scripture notebook, and model that for the children, so that they can see how valuable it is to have this notebook, even as an adult. If we go back and look at the founding fathers, didn't they do a lot of recording in notebooks? And aren't we grateful that they did? And they used those over and over. And I hope that you will too. Thank you.